Okay, welcome back, and in this last lesson here, I'm going to be showing you some techniques in Lightwave 3D of how to automate the placement of certain parts of our character, and we're going to do that through the use of expressions. But first, before we do that, I'm going to give you a word of caution, and that is that once we apply these expressions, we're going to be giving up a lot of control over various aspects of our rig, and that might be a good thing, and it might not, and it all kind of comes down to what your particular project is, and what kind of things that you need to accomplish within that project. And the only way for you to find out whether or not these are beneficial is to actually get in there and try to do some animation and see how well it works out for you. So one other thing before we begin, I've gone in finally and touched up my rig with Zombie, and as you can see, I've done some more color coding because I just love to do that, and I've actually hidden quite a bit of the rig, and I'll show you by going into bone X-ray mode here, and I've actually hidden all these bones here in the rig because I don't really want to see those when I'm working. And you know, the trade-off there is that we did go through some trouble to create this dissolve for zombie mesh, and there's nothing much left there. But this is just something that I particularly like for my workflow. And the other thing I did here, just a couple small things. I actually finally got around to changing some of my context menus, so now I have the ability to select my coordinate system using that, and I actually had some hotkeys, new hotkeys mapped that were supposed to toggle bone X-ray on and off, and unfortunately I had a crash and neglected to get those config files saved when I had that crash. But actually, let me pause for a second. Let me see if I can get those loaded back up, and I'm going to show you what I did. Okay, I got those loaded back up, and just quickly, this is another good workflow tip. I've got my C key mapped to toggle bone X-ray on and off, and so I can quickly hide those bones if I want. And also mapped one other key, and that is actually using a function over here. If you go under L-script, you'll see a select children button over here, and what that allows you to do is, say if I were selected this finger, or the first bone in this finger here, by hitting select children, I can actually get the bones attached lower in the hierarchy to it. Well, I just mapped that to a key as well, and that actually is pretty helpful. The only problem with that one is that you cannot shift select multiple bones and grab the children of them. It only seems to work with one bone. But just there you go. Here's one more little workflow tip for you. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we're going to create a lot of expressions, and it's actually not going to be too difficult. I think I will be able to explain these well enough to you that you'll get the general idea and you can see how it's done. And this won't be completely exhaustive in terms of everything you could do, but we're going to do some really neat stuff here. So I'm going to go ahead and go into the graph editor and start setting up these expressions. But let me tell you briefly first what I'm going to do. I'm going to make some expressions so that actually when we select our IK and start moving our legs around, we actually have the ability to control the pelvis of the character. And this is sort of similar in a way to follower, but we're going to have some added functionality in the expressions, in that we will be able to do them in such a way that we can always keep the pelvis centered between the two feet. So once I move this foot way out here, the pelvis will actually move to the center point of this foot and this foot. And I'm also going to do the same thing along the x-axis, so that if I move the foot out here, the pelvis will actually move to the center point of that. But then I'm going to go even further, and I'm going to create an expression such that the height of the pelvis is also controlled by the placement of the feet. So in other words, once I move my foot around, the actual pelvis will, just as it would in a normal person, will actually dip down a little bit. And that's a pretty neat one as well. And then finally, or actually maybe in between those two, I'm going to show you how to control the rotation of the pelvis based on the rotation of the feet. Okay, let's go ahead and go into the graph editor. And I'm going to go ahead and select all these. And in the channel box, I'm going to hit Shift-D to clear them out. And I'm going to go in here under Zombie Mesh and expand the pelvis. And the first one I'm going to select is going to be position Z, and I'm just going to drag that up there. I'm going to create a new favorite set, and this one is just going to be called hip. And also one other thing I found, and I don't know why I didn't mention this before, when you remember when we created some favorite sets, we actually have the ability to go in here and replace and delete sets, and I should have pointed that out earlier. And actually, as we move through this, I'm going to be replacing my favorite set all the time. And one other thing I'll let you know is that I'm going to be saving my scene out pretty often because I've had some crashes as I've been working on this, and I don't think that's really a stability issue. It may be because of the recording that's happening. It may be because of the resolution I'm running at. It could be any number of things, but just be aware of that, and you may want to do the same thing as well. So down here in the graph editor, you notice we have these tabs here, and I'm sure that you probably have touched on at least the curves one, which will allow you to manipulate the handles of your motion curves in the graph editor. But the one we're going to be using here is expressions. And now in version 7.5, I believe is when it came into existence, we have this great expression builder. And what that allows us to do is actually choose from a lot of canned expressions, and also select different functions in here without really having to know too much about L-script and all the details and syntax of it. It will actually allow us to come in here and sort of just swap things in to different expressions we want to build. So under utility functions, you'll see a whole slew of different functions that we can apply, and the ones we're going to be looking at are hip center, hip height, and hip turnout. And you'll notice that there are several versions of each function, and each one has a little bit more control than the last. Well, I'm going to really just be dealing with the most basic ones, and certainly if you want to go in and find out what some of these more advanced controls do, please do so, but it's really kind of overkill for us to go through and use those at this point. I'm just going to show you the basics. So first I'm going to select hip center, and hip center is going to allow us to select some channels in our left foot and our right foot, and based on that we're going to create an expression, and then we're going to apply that expression to the pelvis. So first I'm going to go into left foot, I'm going to hit channel, and I'm going to locate down here my left heel, which is right there, and I'm going to select the position Z channel and hit choose. I'm going to go on the right foot, go to channel, and I'm going to locate the right heel and select position Z and choose. I'm going to click accept. And what that has done now is created, or at least filled in all the details based on my selection. And down here is the actual expression itself, and up here is a little name box. And I'm going to change that to hip, let's see, hip center underscore Z. I'm going to click Create Expression. And you'll notice down here, back in the graph editor, that that expression has been created. I'll close Builder. And now I'm going to select the Z position of the pelvis here in the channel box, and I'm going to click Apply. I'm going to close that for a second. And now, if I move either foot in the Z direction, you'll notice that the pelvis has now will automatically relocate itself to the center point between those two nulls. And this can be a really handy kind of thing, especially when you're doing a walk cycle. This is definitely a time saver and in terms of locating or relocating your pelvis without really having to go in there and animate every portion of your rig. So let's go back into the graph editor, and I'm going to go back into Builder, and I'm going to use Hip Center again, but this time I'm going to select a different channel, and I'm going to go down here to the left heel, and I'm going to select Position X, click Choose, go into Channel over here, and on the right heel, I'll select Position X, click Choose, click Accept, and this one I'm going to call Hip Center underscore X, click Create Expression, and now over here I'm going to go back into my hip set and drag position X up here, and while I'm at it I'll go ahead and say replace favorite set, just click OK, and I'm going to apply this new expression to that channel. Okay, let me save my scene here real quick. And now you'll notice that if I move the feet along the x-axis, that the hip also moves to the center point between those two. Okay, let's keep going here. Go back into the graph editor, and I'm going to go back into my hip set. And this time I'm going to drag in position Y. I'm going to go into Builder, and now I'm going to go down to Utility Functions here, and this time I'm going to select Hip Height Type A. And now you're going to see a whole lot of stuff that comes into play in creating this expression. Let me just briefly explain what's going to happen. What the point of this expression is that it's going to evaluate based on the distance between our left foot and our right foot, and it's going to modify the Y position of the channel that we apply it to. So if we apply this expression to the Y position of the pelvis, we'll actually find that the pelvis, as I said before, will dip down the further that the feet are apart. But in order to do this, we're actually going to have to do a little bit of calculation. It's relatively painless, and I'll show you a really fast way to do it. But basically, we need to find out the minimum distance between the feet in the x direction, and we need to estimate the maximum distance between the feet, and this is just a guess. And then we're going to figure out where our hip is actually located in the Y position in its default pose, and then we're going to guess how far we would like it to dip down based on the distance between the feet. So let me minimize this for a moment, and I'm going to go into my front view, and I'll notice that down here, if I look in my position box, that the X placement of this null is approximately 98 millimeters. Well, that also means by symmetry that this one is also approximately 98 millimeters from the center. So taking those two things together, we'll have a total of about 196 millimeters between the 2 feet at the default pose. So I'm just going to go ahead and enter 0.196. Okay, now I'm going to go back into my perspective. Actually, I'll go into my right view, and I'm going to make a guess now about how far will my feet go, how far away will they ever get. And I'm going to say probably to about here. And if I look down here in the position box again, you'll notice that we are approximately 545 millimeters from the origin. Let me undo that. Actually, let me delete. Let me just move that back to where it was. And by moving it back, I'll actually also notice that in the default position, it's at about minus 102. So taking those two things together, we'll say about 650 millimeters. But then I'm going to go ahead and add a little more just to be on the safe side. And so here I'm going to add, I'm going to just say a value of 700 millimeters, so I'll enter 0.7. Now we need to figure out where the hip is placed in the Y position by default, and that's relatively easy. We'll just go over here and select our pelvis, and we'll notice that the default Y position is 1.1524 meters. So I'm going to enter that value. And now we need to guess how much we would like our hip to move in the Y direction. Well, I experimented around with this, and I found out putting in a value that's fairly small, with a fairly small difference, is actually giving me the best result. So I'm going to enter in here 1.15 for the moment. And we'll see how that does. But actually I need to go over here, and I need to select the parameters here for the left foot and the right foot. And this is, of course, based on world coordinates, as it details up here in the explanation. So I'll just go ahead and select world vector.